Hi, I'm Odeline. My husband drained our son's entire college fund and vanished with his mistress like we were just dust in his rear view. The next morning, my 10-year-old son, my child, looked me in the eyes and said, "It's okay, Mom. Now he's paying the price." And then? My husband called. Terrified. I used to think betrayal was a one-time knife, but what if it was slow, methodical, planned for years, while I paid every bill, trusted every word, and believed I was building a family? What would you do? If the person who promised to protect your future erased it instead? Before we begin, tell me, what time are you watching this and where are you tuning in from? I read every comment. It started with a ping, just a soft notification from the bank, the kind that usually meant our automatic deposit went through or a credit card payment cleared. I glanced at it, barely awake, still in my robe, coffee half sipped. Then I froze. College savings balance 0.00. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the message. That couldn't be right. It had to be a glitch. I set my coffee down slowly, as if moving too fast might shatter something fragile I didn't yet understand. I logged in fully, typing our login details by muscle memory, our joint savings account for Jace, our 10-year-old son. Waylon and I had built it bit by bit, cutting corners, skipping vacations, packing lunches, all for that fund. But the screen didn't lie. Not a dime left. At first I thought maybe Waylon had moved it to a different savings bucket. Maybe he was reorganizing something. I blinked at the screen again. 0.0. The words didn't change. I checked the transfer history. There it was. A full withdrawal. Last Friday, done through the mobile app. Not split, not partial. Every last dollar gone. My stomach twisted. I reached for my phone and called him. Straight to voicemail. I hung up and tried again. Same thing. Third call. Nothing. My hand began to tremble as I set the phone down on the counter. Footsteps padded softly behind me. "Morning, Mom," Jace said, sleepy-eyed, holding a juice box, his hair stuck up in every direction. I turned, tried to steady my voice. "Hey, sweetie, did you see your dad this morning?" He shook his head and shrugged. "Nope. He left early. Said he had meetings in the city." I nodded slowly. Right. Meetings. I smiled at him, but it felt like my mouth didn't know how to shape the word anymore. I kissed the top of his head and told him to grab his cereal. As he wandered off, I sat back down and opened our credit card dashboard. If Waylon had transferred that much money, I needed to know why. The first charge hit me like a slap. A luxury hotel in South Beach. 4 nights. $3,112. 20 minutes later, a charge from Bal Harbor Shops, Gucci. Then another from Cartier. Over and over, the statement scrolled like a parade of betrayal. High-end dinners, resort spas, multiple airline tickets booked under his name, always with one plus guest. Every weekend he said he was on a work retreat or networking with potential clients. He'd been sipping champagne with someone else. Someone who apparently wore designer heels and slept on 1,000 thread count sheets. I stood up too fast. The kitchen spun for a moment. I braced myself on the countertop. I ran to the bedroom. His side of the closet was half empty. Drawers open, hangers missing, one suitcase gone. His wedding ring? Not in the porcelain dish by the sink where he always dropped it. It wasn't just the money. He had left us. Without a word. Without a damn word. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the numbness settle into my spine. There was no note, no text, no warning, just empty drawers and a vanished future. Behind me, I heard soft footsteps again. Jace stood in the doorway, looking at me. Then, without saying anything, he walked to the kitchen and came back. In his hand was a small post-it note, the kind I kept next to the phone for grocery lists. He set it in my lap and looked up at me. I blinked at the words, written in his careful, uneven scrawl. "It's okay, Mom. I've been watching him too." I blinked at that note like it had come from a man in his 30s, not my 10-year-old son. The handwriting was a little slanted, a little smudged from the way he always pressed the pencil too hard, but the words were steady, certain. Jace sat across from me at the kitchen table, the sunlight catching on his freckles as he scooped another spoonful of cereal. He looked up at me like nothing was out of the ordinary. "What did you mean by that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. He didn't pause. "I've been watching him." A milk mustache painted his upper lip. He wiped it with his sleeve. "Dad's been weird for a while. You didn't notice?" I shook my head, unsure how to answer without unraveling completely. "What exactly have you seen?" He put his spoon down, stood up, and walked toward the hall closet. From behind a stack of board games, he pulled out his old Kindle Fire, the one he barely used anymore except for reading during car rides. He tapped a few times, then sat beside me and turned the screen toward me. "2 weeks ago," he said. "I saw him log into the bank app. I remembered the pattern he used. It's the same one he uses for everything. I took pictures. There were screenshots, clear, time-stamped, unmistakable. I scrolled through them slowly, feeling my heart press harder and harder against my ribs. Transfers from the college savings to an external account, airline confirmations. One photo even showed a message from someone labeled Aunt Marley. "She's not your aunt, is she?" Jace asked. My throat tightened. "No," I whispered. "She's not." He nodded, as if he'd already assumed that. I heard them talking. Twice. He said, "Don't worry, she'll never look here. She doesn't even check the apps unless I tell her to." My stomach dropped. All the times I'd trusted Waylon with our finances, with planning, with our son's future. I thought I was being respectful, letting him take care of things. But I hadn't just handed over control. I'd handed him blind permission to betray us. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. Jace didn't look away. "Because you always try to see the good in people, even when they don't deserve it." That sentence broke something in me, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. I stared at my son, not just at what he knew, but at what he had carried, quietly, alone, trying to protect me in his own way. I reached for his hand, but he pulled back and stood. "I just thought you should know. You don't have to pretend anymore." Then he walked down the hall, the tablet still clutched under his arm. The day passed in a blur. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't read a sentence without losing it halfway. Every noise felt amplified. The neighbor's lawnmower, the dishwasher's cycle, even the fridge's hum. My ears were hunting for the sound of a garage door opening. Footsteps. Anything. By mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text. From Waylon. "I know this is sudden. I need some space. Please don't make this harder. Respect my privacy." That was it. No explanation, no apology, just a request for privacy, as if I were a stranger knocking at a door he no longer lived behind. I didn't respond. I turned my phone face down and walked to our bedroom. I opened the closet again, not because I thought he'd reappear, but because I needed to see the void, to remind myself this wasn't some horrible dream. That's when I noticed it. The small velvet box I'd kept tucked in my drawer, next to my scarves and old journals. My father's wedding ring had been inside. I'd kept it after he passed. It was the only thing of his Waylon ever admired. The box was still there, but the ring was gone. That was when I finally let myself cry. I didn't wail, I didn't scream. I just sat there on the carpeted floor, hands limp in my lap, as the tears found their own way out. I didn't cry because of the money, or even the affair. I cried because I couldn't believe I'd let this happen under my own roof, while my son had known, and I hadn't. That evening, I was chopping carrots for dinner, just something mindless to keep me from spiraling, when I heard his steps. Jace leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me like he was older than he had any right to be. "Don't worry," he said softly with the smallest of smiles. "He won't get far." Those words should have scared me, but they didn't. They felt like the only truth left standing in a house that had quietly cracked from the inside. The next morning began like most others had, at least outwardly. I was stirring eggs on the stove, trying to move through muscle memory while my mind was still stuck in the night before. Jace padded down the hall in his socks, rubbing one eye like any other 10-year-old. Except he wasn't. As I placed his plate on the table, I noticed the garage door, the one that connected to our mudroom, was shut. Not unusual, but the latch was flipped from the inside. "Jace," I said gently, "why's the garage locked?" He looked up at me from his scrambled eggs and shrugged. "I just needed to work on something." I raised an eyebrow. "In the garage?" He didn't elaborate, just continued eating like I hadn't asked. I let it go, for the moment. After breakfast, I packed his lunch and we drove the short distance to his school. He talked about science class and a reading test coming up. His voice was easy, calm, like nothing was weighing on him, but I felt it. Something more behind his words, like he was letting me see just enough to keep me steady while holding back everything that might tilt me over the edge. When I got home, I didn't go straight to my desk like usual. I walked slowly through the mudroom and placed my hand on the garage doorknob. It was still latched, but the door wasn't locked. I turned it, stepped in quietly, and stopped dead in my tracks. At first glance, it looked like any garage, boxes stacked high, an old treadmill we never used, bikes hanging from wall hooks. But to the right, where the tool bench used to be, something new had taken shape. A whiteboard stretched across the wall, nearly edge to edge. Words and arrows connected in red and black marker. Account numbers, flight dates, a small sticky note that said M, not Aunt. Below it, a table was cluttered with what looked like a makeshift surveillance setup, an old laptop, a tangle of cables, a tiny audio interface, and a pair of headphones that still had the clearance sticker on them. A file folder lay open, pages half slid out, labeled in Jace's handwriting, Dad. Calls. There was another item on the table that made my blood run cold. A device, one of those cheap baby monitors we'd never used, hooked up to a phone and labeled Mom's Room. I stood there, barely breathing. He hadn't just been watching. He'd been listening, recording, documenting. For how long? I scanned the whiteboard again. Under Week 2, a bulleted list, 11:07 p.m., call with M, said she doesn't even ask anymore. Confirmed Miami trip 4/12. Transferred $2,000 to hidden account. I sank onto the stool by the wall. My legs just gave. I thought I'd known everything there was to know about Waylon's betrayal. But I was wrong. I had underestimated both of them, my husband's depth of deception and my son's quiet brilliance. That afternoon dragged until 3:10. I waited in the pickup line, heartbeat slow but heavy. Jace climbed into the car and looked at me like nothing had changed. "Did you eat lunch?" I asked softly. "Yeah, Pizza Friday." We didn't speak again until we were home. He dropped his backpack by the door and grabbed a snack from the pantry. I sat on the couch, hands folded in my lap. "Jace?" He glanced at me. "I went into the garage today." He paused. "Okay. I saw what you've been working on." Still no alarm in his voice. He walked toward me and sat down. "Do you want to ask anything?" I looked him in the eyes. "Why did you do it?" He didn't blink. "Insurance." "Insurance?" He nodded. "So when you're ready, you can win." I felt a wave rise in my chest. Part awe, part ache. My son hadn't built a fort, he'd built a case. Quietly, precisely, methodically. "But you're a child," I whispered, barely knowing whether I was talking to him or myself. "You're not supposed to know how to do this." He shrugged. "I learn fast," and he got sloppy. He always leaves his phone around. "Jace, this isn't a game." "I know. You shouldn't have had to do this alone." "I wasn't alone. I was waiting for you to catch up." He stood again, like the conversation was over, and carried his crackers into the den. I stayed on the couch, staring into space, a single question looping in my head. What else had I missed? That night after dinner, Jace went to bed early. He didn't ask for a story, just said goodnight and shut the door behind him. I cleaned the kitchen, checked my email, and eventually stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my teeth in slow, distracted circles. The house was quiet. Too quiet. My phone buzzed. I picked it up from the counter and flipped it over. Blocked number. One text. "You should teach your kid not to play with fire." I dropped the toothbrush. I stood in the bathroom, the message still glowing on my phone screen like a slow-burning fuse. I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and sat on the edge of the tub. That text wasn't some vague warning. It was a clear, deliberate threat. Jace had gone to bed early, but I knew he wasn't asleep. The boy barely blinked when things got quiet, like he was training for a war no one else could see. I didn't want him to know about the message, not yet. The next morning, just after 7, I was pouring coffee when the landline rang. The sound startled me. No one called it anymore, not since telemarketers gave up on landlines altogether. I hesitated, then picked up. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then a woman's voice, smooth as glass and twice as cold. "Hi? Is this Odeline?" I said nothing. "I'm calling about the Miami condo. Waylon mentioned you might still need to sign off on some documents. He said you'd be reasonable about it." Her voice was gentle, practiced, like someone who'd taught themselves to smile through court depositions. "I'm sorry, who is this?" I asked, even though I already knew. She chuckled. "Delaney. I figured it was time we spoke directly. Waylon said you'd want to keep things simple. No drama. Just a signature and we can all move on." I didn't answer. She kept talking, filling the silence like she was hosting a lifestyle podcast. "It's really just a formality, Odeline. He didn't want to bother you, especially not with everything going on, but..." I hung up. No words. No reply. Just the sharp click of finality. I placed the receiver down, calmly, and walked to the sink. My hand was steady now. If she wanted simple, she shouldn't have stolen from someone with nothing left to lose. Around 4 p.m., I heard the screen door creak and Jace's shoes hit the entry mat. He walked in, winded, a gray backpack slung awkwardly over one shoulder. He pulled something from the side pocket, a drone. The rotor arm was cracked and the camera mount dangled by a wire. "What happened?" I asked. He set it down on the counter like it was a science project gone wrong. "I flew it over their hotel, tried to get a better angle." My hands gripped the sink. "What?" "I was careful," he said quickly, "but I think I got too close to the windows." "Jace, why would you do that?" He looked up at me, eyes sharp and unmoved. "You said the college fund was about my future, so I'm protecting it." I didn't know what stunned me more, his reasoning or how much of it made sense. We didn't talk for a while after that. He took the broken drone to the garage, muttering about repairs and motor torque. I just stood there, drying a mug I didn't remember washing. Around 6:30, as I was chopping carrots for soup, the doorbell rang. I peeked through the side window and sighed. Cressida, of course. She came in with her usual waft of department store perfume and the smile she wore like a mask sewn too tight. "I was just in the area," she said, handing me a small paper bag. "Brought some tea. Figured you could use it." I set the bag on the counter. "Thanks." She looked around, eyes scanning for disorder. "The place looks all right." I kept chopping. She lingered in the doorway a few seconds too long before speaking again. "Odeline, I don't mean to stir the pot, but maybe if you'd been more present, Waylon wouldn't have felt the need to drift." I put the knife down carefully. "You mean cheat?" I asked, keeping my voice even. She winced like I'd said something uncivilized. "That's not the word I'd use." "No, of course not. You'd probably use reposition or explore other options." She forced a laugh, but it didn't go anywhere. "I'm just saying, men don't just wake up one day and walk away. They drift when they don't feel seen or appreciated." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. Let her talk. Let her circle the drain of her own assumptions. When she stood to leave, coat folded over her arm, she dropped one more thing like it was nothing. "By the way," she said near the door, "Mom thinks it'd be better for Jace if you just let this go quietly. Don't make a mess of it." I opened the door for her. "Thanks for the tea." She smiled again, soft and polished, and walked out. I stood there until I heard her car start, then closed the door behind me. I leaned back against it, let the silence settle. Then Jace stepped out of the hallway holding a small black USB stick. His face was calm, but his voice had a quiet edge. "They're all lying to your face," he said, and lifted the drive. "But I've got something they can't delete." I stared at Jace's face, lit dimly by the hallway light. His eyes weren't angry. They weren't even sad. They were steady, like he had already done the grieving and was just waiting for me to catch up. "What do you mean?" I asked, stepping closer. "What do you have?" He held out the flash drive like it weighed nothing. "It's all on here. I've had it ready for a while." We sat down at the kitchen table. He plugged the drive into his tablet and tapped through a few folders. Then he turned the screen toward me. "You might want to wear headphones." I didn't. I wanted to hear it raw. Whatever it was, I didn't want it softened. The video started. Blurry at first. Dark shapes, dashboard lights. But the audio was unmistakably clear. Waylon's voice. "She's too soft," he said, followed by a burst of laughter. "Always has been. I emptied the fund right in front of her and she didn't even blink." I stopped breathing. He kept going. "Odeline's the kind of woman you marry for tax benefits. Delaney's the kind you live for." Another voice, Delaney's, laughed in the background. "I told you she'd never see it coming," she said. "She's practically allergic to confrontation." They both laughed again, like they were sharing a private joke at my expense. I didn't react at first, not even a flinch. I just let it play until the end. Jace sat quietly across from me, waiting. "Where did you get this?" I finally asked. He looked down, a little sheepish. "Remember my science fair project, the GPS tracker? I used the prototype and hid it in the rental car's back seat when Dad was packing for Miami." I blinked. It was set to start recording when the car doors locked, caught them talking as they drove to the condo. I leaned back, hands folded in my lap. The house was quiet, too quiet. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the soft tick of the wall clock. I stood, walked slowly down the hall and into my bedroom. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat at the edge of the bed and stared at the carpet like it might reveal something I'd missed. Years, 15 to be exact, 15 years of bills, of dinners reheated because he was late, of birthdays where the gift wasn't quite right, but I smiled anyway, of every single time I'd chosen to stay because leaving would have made things harder on Jace. And it had all been a mask. Every kiss, every shared inside joke, every "don't worry babe, I got this." Fake. I whispered it aloud, almost like a prayer. So it was all fake. The sound of my voice made it real. I opened the bottom drawer of my nightstand and pulled out an old leather file folder. Inside were papers I hadn't touched in over a decade, legal documents from my dad's estate. I flipped through, scanning quickly until I found it. The deed, the beachside condo. My name still sat clearly at the top, beside my father's scrawled signature, the one Waylon had insisted we'd transferred years ago. But we hadn't. It was mine. Still, the same place he'd brought her to, the same place he now called ours, as if Delaney had earned any of it. I closed the folder and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. There were no tears, just a heavy, pressing silence, like the moment before a thunderstorm finally breaks. Later that night, after we'd both changed into pajamas and the house had settled, Jace came to my bedroom door. He knocked once, then peeked in. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, patting the bed beside me. He sat down, swinging his legs slowly. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. "But if you don't use that recording, I will." I turned to him, watching how his small hands clenched together in his lap. He wasn't asking for permission. He was giving me a choice. His words still echoed in the hallway long after he'd gone back to his room. "If you don't use it, I will." He wasn't bluffing. And that's what terrified me. My 10-year-old son had more resolve than most grown men I knew. By 7 the next morning, I was parked outside a small legal aid office near Main Street. I had barely slept, running on black coffee and a kind of fury I hadn't felt in years, a fury I no longer wanted to push down. Inside, a middle-aged attorney named Fran greeted me. Her glasses were too large for her face, and her cardigan looked like it had weathered 3 different divorces, but she had sharp eyes and sharper questions. I laid out the documents, the statements, the screenshots, the video clip. She listened quietly, only interrupting once to ask, "Do you still have ownership over the condo?" I nodded. "Technically, yes. It was left to me by my father. I never filed the quitclaim." Fran tapped the edge of the desk with her pen, then smiled, slowly. "You're sitting on a nuclear file. Let's make sure it detonates in the right courtroom." By lunchtime, we had filed a formal petition to freeze all joint assets. Waylon wouldn't be accessing another dime under my name. I signed the emergency petition for spousal protection. Financial fraud and coercive abandonment, filed under Missouri statutes. At the clerk's counter, the young woman stamping my paperwork looked me straight in the eye and gave a nod. Quiet, respectful, as if to say, "I see you." I didn't cry, not even when I got back into the car. I just drove home, opened my laptop, and composed a single email. Subject, case number 08-23-FD1391. Body, you left with my money. I'm taking back my name. Attached, a screenshot of the case filing confirmation. I hit send. No flourish, no explanation. Let him feel the silence for once. That afternoon I picked Jace up from school. He was quieter than usual, but his eyes searched my face as he slid into the back seat. "You okay?" he asked. I kept my hands on the wheel and gave a small nod. "I saw the lawyer." He didn't press, just gave a short, satisfied and looked out the window. By dinner time, the house had settled. I was unloading the dishwasher when my phone buzzed. A voice message, unknown number. I hit play. It was her, Delaney. She was panicked, breathless, and trying hard not to sound it. "Odeline, hi. We just got to the condo and the locks were changed. The building manager said the deed was updated this morning. Did you do this?" I didn't respond with a call, just a text. "You're trespassing. I suggest you leave before the police arrive." It was a sentence I'd rehearsed for years in my head, only I never expected it to feel this clean. Later that night, after Jace finished his homework, I tucked him in. He didn't look tired. He looked resolved. "There's one more thing," he said, pulling his blanket up to his chest. "I wasn't going to show you this, but I think you should know." He reached into his backpack and handed me a tiny USB. "It's not for court," he added. "It's just for you, something Dad said about Grandma," when he thought no one was listening. I took the drive, my heart pounding in my ears. After he fell asleep, I walked down the hallway and into my bedroom. The walls were dimly lit by the street lamp filtering through the curtains. I plugged the USB into my laptop and double-clicked the only file. The video began to play, a grainy visual of Waylon pacing a hotel balcony with his phone on speaker. Then his voice, steady and cruel. She always took Odeline's side, that old woman, acted like she was some golden child. Even when I told her we were struggling, she had the nerve to say, "Take care of my girl, she's not like the others." A pause. "You know what I should have done?" he said, chuckling. "Sold that condo right after her funeral. Bet she's still watching, hoping I'd do right by her." Well, too bad. My stomach twisted. I sat straight up, and for the first time since this all began, I felt something else rise in me. Not anger, not betrayal, conviction. His voice was like cold steel in the dark, measured, calm, and void of anything human. "She'll lose it when she finds out," Waylon chuckled in the recording. "But I'll already have him enrolled. A judge won't reverse a kid's education once it's in motion. That's just how it works." I didn't move for several seconds. My jaw clenched so tight my molars ached. He wasn't just trying to bankrupt me or shame me, he was planning to steal my son. As soon as the recording ended, I went straight to my desk drawer. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled out the folder with Jace's birth certificate, school registration forms, medical authorization, everything I had left that legally tethered me to him. I checked every signature, every box, every date. Everything was still intact. For now. But it was clear, this wasn't about spite anymore. Waylon wanted to erase me completely. The next hour passed in a blur. I barely remember grabbing my purse or locking the door, but I remember the weight in my chest as I drove across town. Cressida answered her door with a forced smile, brushing non-existent crumbs off her shirt like she hadn't been expecting me. "You knew," I said, not bothering with a greeting. Her mouth opened, but I didn't give her space to deny it. "Did you know about the school? The move? The custody switch he's trying to pull behind my back?" Her gaze dropped to the floor. "He asked for help getting in touch with our cousin, Courtney, who works admissions at Naples Crest." My fingers curled into fists. "You helped him take my son." Cressida stepped back, voice shrinking. "I didn't know it was like that. He said you were unstable, that Jace needed a fresh start." "Stop," I cut in. "Don't you dare justify it." The silence that followed was like a wall between us. She didn't apologize. She just stood there, blinking like maybe she was the one being attacked. "I came here hoping to find someone still on my side," I said quietly. "But I see now. He got to all of you." Back in the car, I sat in the driveway for a full minute, staring out through the windshield before starting the engine. My fingers itched for action. My brain burned with one thought: I had to move faster than him. By early evening, I was back at the legal aid office. This time, I wasn't just a scorned woman filing protective orders. I was a mother filing for emergency jurisdiction for sole custody. Fran, the attorney, read over the audio transcript and financial records without flinching. She leaned forward, tapping her pen against the printed screenshots. "You need to be ready for retaliation," she warned, "and fast." "I'm already behind," I replied. We submitted the documents to the circuit court before the close of business that day. I walked out with an official case number and a temporary hold order. If Waylon tried to pull Jace out of school, he'd be in direct violation of an active court action. That gave me a sliver of peace. Until I got home and opened the mailbox. Tucked between the usual stack of coupons and junk mail was a folded flyer, half wet from condensation. I opened it. At first, I couldn't understand what I was looking at. It was my face, but twisted, altered. My eyes exaggerated, mouth agape in mid-sentence. Across the top in bold red letters, "Wanted, mentally unstable woman, endangering minor child." My stomach flipped. There was no source, no author, no official seal, just something cheap and vile meant to spread fear. I walked into the house and dropped it on the kitchen counter. Jace looked up from the table, noticed the paper, and stood. He read it. Blinked. "They're getting desperate," he said simply. "That means you're winning." The strange thing was, I believed him. After dinner, I cleaned up the kitchen, folded laundry, and tucked him in like any other night. His routine hadn't changed, but I knew everything around us had. As I pulled the bedroom curtains shut, something flickered outside, blue and red bouncing off the window panes. Sirens. I stepped to the hallway, heart thumping. Flashing police lights bathed the front yard in harsh color. I moved toward the window slowly, heart pounding. The flashing red and blue lights painted our front lawn in rhythm. For a second, I thought they were here for us, but the cruisers rolled past my house and came to a halt at the rental across the street. That's when it clicked. The house with the black SUV in the driveway, the one with the tinted windows and always drawn blinds. I never paid much attention to it, too distracted by the chaos in my own life. But now, under the weight of those sirens, the puzzle came together. 2 officers approached the front door with the kind of calm that precedes a storm. Their voices were low, professional, but when the door opened, there was no mistaking who stood behind it. Delaney, hair tied back, no makeup, wearing an oversized sweatshirt that didn't belong to her. Within minutes, she was in cuffs. I watched through the window, arms crossed tightly, the corner of my mouth twitching in something close to satisfaction. She didn't look like someone who had won. She looked like someone who had run out of places to hide. Waylon wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. The next knock came 5 minutes later. Not from panic, not from rage. It was professional, steady. I opened the front door. The lead officer was a tall woman in her 40s, her expression unreadable. "Ms. Marin?" "Yes?" She held out a tablet. "We received a data drop last night. Anonymous source. evidence of financial fraud, identity manipulation, and child relocation plans. Origin of data traced to this block, specifically this address. Did you send it? I didn't flinch. No, I said, but I think I know who did. Behind me, Jace stepped forward. He didn't say a word, just held up a small USB drive in a clear zip bag. The officer's eyes moved between us. She took the bag, nodded once, then turned away. After they left, I closed the door and sat down at the kitchen table, Jace across from me. You submitted the drive? I asked. He nodded. I didn't put my name on it, just the files. I plugged in my laptop and opened the folder. There it was. Audio clips, screenshots, banking logins, a document trail connecting Waylon to transactions, aliases, and even a falsified grant form that used my father's name, his signature, to pretend Jace had received a scholarship to a private school in Florida. It was as disgusting as it was desperate. I stared at that forged document for a long time. It wasn't just a betrayal of me, it was a theft from the dead. From a man who had once told me, "Your name is worth more than anything you'll ever own." By noon, the local news apps on my phone were buzzing nonstop. Local contractor under investigation for embezzling minors' college fund. Forgery tied to real estate fraud linked to Naples-based trust account. Waylon's picture, taken from a local fundraiser years ago, was splashed across every page. Delaney's was fuzzier, but there. My name was absent from most of it. When it did appear, it was in the context of the ex-wife believed to be the victim. I didn't have to speak. The facts were doing that for me. Later that night, while folding laundry in the living room, my phone buzzed. Voicemail, Waylon. The preview read, "You win. Is that what you wanted?" I didn't listen to the rest, just hovered my thumb over the trash icon and hit delete. No closure, no explanation, no power left for him to take. The next morning, I scrambled eggs while Jace scrolled through his homework notes. He was quieter than usual, but not withdrawn, more like someone saving his words. As I set his plate on the table, he pulled something from his hoodie pocket and set it gently between us. A gold wedding band. Worn, familiar, unmistakable. "He left it behind," Jace said softly. I stared at it. Not with grief, not even with anger. Just a quiet understanding. It was over. I looked at the wedding band resting in Jace's hand, catching the morning light just so. It had no weight anymore. At least, not for the reasons it once did. I took it gently, my fingers closing around the cool gold. No words passed between us. He simply nodded as if he already knew what I was going to do. Outside, the air was crisp, still early enough that the neighborhood hadn't stirred. I walked toward the garden bed on the east side of the house, where the soil was always softer. That corner held something precious. A single rose bush my father planted the week Jace was born. It bloomed stubbornly every spring, no matter how harsh the winter. I knelt and pressed the ring into the earth. No ceremony, no tears. Just my hands moving with quiet finality. Jace stood a few feet back, watching. Not asking, just being there. That ring never meant anything to Waylon, but burying it, that meant something to me. 2 weeks later, the custody hearing concluded with no appearance from Waylon, no surprise. His attorney filed for withdrawal. Delaney had her arraignment the same week. She pled not guilty, then changed her plea after the evidence was read aloud. Her bail was denied. The condo in Miami was sold under my name, clean and legal. What was left of the college fund had been battered, but with the fraud reversed, some of the money had returned. I moved it into a new account. Jace's name on the title. Sole control. No shared access. I didn't tell him. He didn't ask. But one afternoon, as I picked him up from school, his teacher pulled me aside. "Mrs. Halberg," she said hesitant, "Jace is doing well. Exceptionally well, actually, but he's quiet. More focused than most kids his age. He doesn't smile the way he used to." I nodded. "He's grown up a lot lately." She looked at me carefully. "It's like he sees things the other kids don't, like he's watching the room instead of being in it. I didn't know how to answer that. But later, as we drove home, Jace stared out the window and asked, "Do you think people stop loving someone all at once? Or slowly?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Sometimes, it's not about love disappearing. It's about seeing things clearly for the first time." That night we had dinner, just the two of us, same as most nights now. I made grilled cheese and tomato soup. Simple, warm, comfort. As he dunked his sandwich into the bowl, he looked at me and said, "I'm glad you fought back, Mom. I didn't want to do it all alone." My throat tightened, but I smiled through it. "Neither did I," I said. "But sometimes, strength runs in both directions." After dinner, I found myself cleaning out the drawer near the coffee table, the one where everything ends up eventually. Old receipts, tangled cords, expired coupons. At the bottom was a small yellow square, folded once, the post-it from weeks ago. I unfolded it slowly. His handwriting, a little crooked, a little brave. "It's okay, Mom. I've been watching him too." I stared at it a long while, then reached for a pen. Underneath his words, I wrote, "Because I remembered who I am." Later that night, I placed it in a small frame. Not fancy, just enough. We sat on the porch together as the sun went down, wrapped in silence. It wasn't the heavy kind. It was earned, like breath after a long run, like stillness after a storm. Jace leaned his head on my shoulder. I didn't move. We didn't talk about what came next. We didn't need to. Some battles we win with voices, others with silence. And sometimes, your child becomes the reason you rise, not the reason you stay. Have you ever been pushed to your breaking point by someone who once promised to protect you? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone.